You're listening to the Bird Dog Babe podcast with my mom, Courtney Bastion.
Like I said, we have over 500 researchers, veterinarians, veterinary nutritionists on staff to figure out the best way to really grow this bacteria, the exact temperature to grow it, the exact pH to grow it, and making sure that it's viable. So if it's coming from Purina, I can guarantee you that if we make a claim, we're promising that.
Hey, bird dog babes. My name is Courtney Bastion, and I am obsessed with all things bird dogs. And I'm here with you to share the stories, experiences, knowledge, and opinions from the women and a few guys in the industry that are killing it. I'm a Wisconsin girl living in a Montana world. I'm mom and two incredible kiddos, wife and occasional assistant to a pro gun dog trainer, traveling the U.S. talking about canine nutrition while hunting, breeding, and competing with my German wire hair pointers and Bracco Italianos. As someone who started hunting later in life because I wanted to give my dogs the opportunity to do what they were bred to do, I'm here to help inspire, educate, and connect women to get their bird dogs out in the field and experience a bond like no other. So pour yourself a glass of wine and get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn. This is the Bird Dog Babe podcast. What if someone told you that you could help your dog cope with external stressors like separation anxiety, unfamiliar visitors, novel sounds or changes in routine and location, or be able to clear up loose stools without administering drugs and medication? Today we are talking to Dr. Taylor Francis, the Veterinary Communications Manager for Nestle Purina PetCare. Dr. Francis tells us all about Purina's new product, Calming Care, and why Fortiflora is the #1 probiotic brand prescribed by veterinarians, in addition to probiotics in Purina's Savor formulas. As a consultant on behalf of Purina Pro Plan, I've seen and heard about so many situations where probiotics have improved our dog's quality of life. It really is amazing the research and discoveries happening at Purina, and I'm grateful to have access within my team to bring you such knowledgeable experts to share it with all of you. Dr. Taylor Francis has agreed to join me for a Zoom conference with my Patreon patrons to help answer any questions or concerns regarding today's topic. And a surprise gift to all of my Patreon patrons, I am going to ship you out a free box of your choice of either the Fortiflora or Calming Care, which retails for about $50. Just one more perk of being one of the Bird Dog Babe patrons. For $5 a month, go to patreon.com/the Bird Dog Babe to join. I also want to give my listeners a chance at winning a box, so stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how. Okay, let's get after it. Thank you to sponsor Dakota 283, unparalleled protection for traveling to and from your favorite hunting spot. Dakota 283 kennels are a premium quality rotomold with recessed handles on top for convenient and safe tie down and makes it easy to lift up into the truck. I love the secure door frame with high security lock, so I know my dogs are safe when I need to stop for fuel. An added bonus is the drain hole in the back, which makes cleaning a breeze when your dog has been run hard and put away wet. Head over to dakota283.com and enter promo code BirdDogBabe for a 10% discount through the end of June.
How are you doing today, Taylor?
I'm good. How are you, Courtney?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for joining us today for this. The topic of probiotics is something I think that a lot of us have heard of, but we don't necessarily know the nitty-gritty of it and the specifics and really why it would be important for us that are competing, that are hunting, that have really active dogs, and how that can affect their overall health and mentality, really. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll have some better understanding of really why we're choosing probiotics, which probiotics we're choosing for what
problems or just for maintenance of health, and you'll have a better understanding of really where we are in the probiotics world.
Mm-hmm. Right. So tell us a little bit about what you do and your position with Purina.
So my title is Veterinary Communications Manager with Purina, and really I kind of facilitate the conversations between the Purina sales staff and veterinarians. I interact with veterinarians at conferences, especially when we come out with new products. We have a lot of influence in the veterinary schools in that we hire reps, and really the focus at the universities is just kind of bringing the options that Purina has with a broader scope of nutrition in general to the students. Okay. But that's honestly one of my favorite parts about this job, getting to interact with the future veterinarians.
Right. And do you practice?
Yes, I do private practice in Nashville, Tennessee.
So tell us a little bit, what exactly are probiotics?
So the definition of a probiotic is a live beneficial bacteria. And when we're approaching probiotics, I want you to keep that in mind, because notice I didn't say exactly for GI disease. And when we're talking about calming care, I didn't say anxiety. So the broad scope of probiotic is a live beneficial bacteria. So it just depends on the genus and species and strain on what benefits that those probiotics convey.
Okay. And that is with all the different strains of probiotics, which we're kind of learning is Purina has been able to come up with these amazing solutions through a probiotic for our dogs, of how many different strains there are really out there, and that we don't really know to the extent of what that is.
Yeah, I mean, there are countless amounts of different strains of these bacteria. And as we talk about this, what we're going to find is that some strains, and when I say strains, we're talking like in the case of Fortiflora, Enterococcus faecium SF68. SF68 is the specific strain. But there are some strains of Enterococcus faecium that can be detrimental to the animal. Mm-hmm. And so the benefit of Purina is that we're part of Nestle, and Nestle has a research facility in regards to probiotics in Switzerland. And to my knowledge, they have about 3,000 different strains that they're studying right now.
Wow. And in Nestle in general, there's approximately how many veterinarians and scientists on staff?
500 plus veterinarians, researchers, PhDs. We have people that just focus and went to school basically to figure out exactly what goes on a bag. I mean, there's a huge array of professionals and scientists and veterinarians in Purina, but on average, I'd say about 500.
Okay, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us on the differences between probiotics and prebiotics? Because both are terms that we're hearing about, but I feel like probiotics is the one that we hear most about. So can you touch on that?
Sure. So like I said before, probiotics are live beneficial bacteria versus prebiotics. So prebiotics, it's really synonymous with like a soluble fiber source, and that's food for the bacteria in our microbiome. You're going to hear the word a synbiotic. So when you hear the word synbiotic, that is a probiotic, the live beneficial bacteria, and then a fiber source, which is synonymous with prebiotic, which really acts as food for those bacteria that are in the probiotic, but also for your native microbiome and the bacteria in your system.
Okay. So the first product I want to talk about that Purina has is the Fortiflora, and this is one that's been around for a while. And it's something that I know in my field, we get a lot of people asking for samples for dogs to try it. And a lot of times it's for the reason that the dogs are having loose stool. Mm-hmm. So what is the actual recommendation and purpose of Fortiflora?
Well, if you look at the indications for Fortiflora, I think what we started off with Fortiflora is we came out with with a probiotic indicated for gastrointestinal disease. So Fortiflora is really packing a punch and trying to address this dysbiosis. So be it stress, diet change. We know if we try and change a dog's or cat's diet very quickly without transitioning, it can cause some GI disease. And that's really secondary to this dysbiosis. And so Fortiflora's job, if we're approaching it in the field of gastrointestinal problems, the job of that is to really bring this dysbiosis back to a more beneficial microbiome, having that bacteria. But as we progressed through the research with Fortiflora, what we saw is that we actually saw improved immune function with Fortiflora. For example, feline herpes virus manifests in cats as conjunctivitis or rhinitis. And right now we don't have a ton of good medical management for that, be it steroids or lysine. We're talking efficacy and side effects with those two. But what we found with that is that with Fortiflora in its pilot study, these cats that had naturally occurring rhinitis and conjunctivitis with feline herpes virus, they actually had a reduced incidence of conjunctivitis. Mm-hmm. And then extrapolate that to there was a study done with the Alaskan sled dogs, and what we saw is that when these dogs were administered a canine distemper virus vaccination booster, with the normal, the dogs that were in the control that did not get the probiotics, what we saw is a normal vaccine curve. So, the titers go up and then they kind of drop down, they plateau out. But when we administered the dogs Fortiflora and we gave them the canine distemper virus vaccination booster, what we saw is about a similar peak, so not an overstimulation, but it sustained at that peak level. And I mean, when I first read that study, I was thinking, well, why shouldn't every dog be on Fortiflora if it's showing these benefits? And I think the point of that study is showing that not every single patient has to be on a probiotic, but what we're seeing are benefits from those probiotics that you can't really get with anything else.
So was that researcher, is the recommendation to be giving Fortiflora to our dogs every day?
That is the recommendation with Fortiflora. And it really depends on what you're trying to, what benefit you're trying to get from Fortiflora. If you just want to use it as an everyday sort of thing, just to help maintain a good microbiome and help with the maintenance of the immunologic functions of the immune system, you can give it every day. But we have another study where these Alaskan sled dogs would break out with diarrhea, and they were administered either control or Fortiflora for 7 days. And what we saw is the dogs that broke out with diarrhea that were not supplemented with Fortiflora actually didn't end up at the end of 7 days going to 100% resolution of that diarrhea. But what we saw with the Fortiflora group is that 90% of those dogs improved in 4 days, and 100% of those dogs had normal stool after 5 days. And so once again, Purina has this very, very strong study that not only says that, hey, Fortiflora works, but it also gives us as clinicians and owners and pet parents days, because the number one question we're going to have is how long is this going to take to work? And going off that study, what I find is that you probably see improvements in 4 days, but I'd give it at least 5 days.
Okay. For somebody like me, or probably the majority of my listeners that have multiple dogs. So I have 8 of my own. We typically have around 6 additional client dogs in for training. So it's not so feasible to give all of them Fortiflora every single day.
Right.
So we take it along to anytime we go hunting or to NAVTA test, field trial, and we give it to them then. Do you think that there's benefit to starting them on that day? Or should we be starting it a couple days in advance before the event?
So if we kind of extrapolate from both those studies I talked about, the first study with the improved immune function with the canine distemper virus vaccination booster, that was a 40-week-long study. Mm-hmm. The additional study with the diarrhea was only 7 days, and we saw significant improvements in 7 days. So,
and what about for pregnant bitches? And is there any kind of research or benefit if we're going to be boosting their immune systems while they are pregnant?
We don't have any studies that really focus on pregnant bitches in that sense. So I can't really say that we would have a benefit. I don't see any contraindications with giving it to one, but I can't definitively say that, yes, we have studied it and it will help.
Okay. But there's no harm in giving it.
No, there's no harm in giving it.
Okay. Another use that I use it frequently for is with puppies when we're weaning them over to kibble. We're putting in a packet once a day, just in their pan of food. And I'm noticing that since we started using it, that their stool is much more consistent and firm, because it seems like you start letting them outside and do exploring or a little bit of extra environmental stressors, and it can be get very loose. And this is keeping them just very compact and seems much more healthy than we were not giving it to them. Is there anything about harm in giving it to puppies?
With any kind of introduction of a bacterial agent, being it beneficial or potentially harmful bacteria, I wouldn't recommend giving it to puppies while they're weaning, but after they're finished weaning, then I would feel comfortable giving it.
Okay, so after they're completely moved over to kibble?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's good to know.
They're still forming their immune system. They're getting their antibodies from mom. So they're still trying to form this. And like I said before, we don't have any studies to support the claim of giving it to weaning puppies. But with anything, I want them to get their maternal antibodies and I want them to form their immune system, and then we can start supplementing with Fortiflora.
Okay. With the loose stool, a lot of people are going to be giving metronidazole to the dogs to help firm that up. Are we able to give Fortiflora with metronidazole?
So interestingly enough, we have studies with Fortiflora, very strong studies. It's one of the most studied probiotics on the market. And there was a study with Dr. Mike Lappin, and where they administered metronidazole dogs that broke out with diarrhea shelter situations. And on average, those dogs improved about 4.4 days. But what they did in this study is they actually took the Enterococcus faecium SF68, that specific strain, and they found that it's resistant to metronidazole. And so what they did is they gave metronidazole and Fortiflora at the exact same time during this study. And what we saw is the dogs improved in 2.8 days. As opposed to just metronidazole alone. So to answer your question, yes, we can give Fortiflora and metronidazole at the same time because we have these studies. Okay. Interestingly enough, also, we have an additional study with another broad spectrum antibiotic, Clavamox, amoxicillin clavulanic acid. And we found that Fortiflora is actually sensitive to Clavamox. So in those situations, I recommend separating them by 2 hours.
Okay. So by sensitive, you mean, what do you mean by that?
Oh, I apologize. So with any kind of antibiotic, we have certain antibiotics for skin. We have certain antibiotics for urinary tract infections. And what we're trying to get is a sensitivity and resistance factor. So take, for instance, Clavamox. Clavamox works really good and really well for certain strains of bad bacteria. But on the other hand, it might be, so if the bacteria is sensitive to Clavamox, that means Clavamox will be able to disrupt the system of the bacteria, as opposed to if a bacteria is resistant, and think about methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That is a situation where these oxacillins / penicillins are not effective because that certain type of bacteria is resistant to that specific antibiotic and its mechanism of action.
Okay. So in this strain of bacteria with Fortiflora, how different is that from people that are saying that they're just supplementing probiotics by giving their dogs yogurt?
So I've had clients with the same mindset. And so, some yogurts do contain these active cultures. but the amounts and the types of bacteria are really limited, and they really may not convey any health benefit. We haven't studied these specific strains, and I don't know. I mean, you could find any kind of yogurt, but I just don't think they're going to have the number. And we haven't studied these specific strains in dogs and cats. And actually, yogurt tends to contain some lactose, and some patients may be a little sensitive to lactose. You can actually cause some GI upset administering yogurt to dogs and cats. So really, there's not enough evidence out there that shows any benefit from giving yogurt.
Okay, makes sense. What is it about the Fortiflora that seems to have an appetite enhancer in it? Like when people are telling us their dog isn't eating, we give them a couple packs of Fortiflora to do, and then the dogs are gobbling the food right up. Yeah,
I think anybody who's used Fortiflora can agree that it is extremely palatable for their patients. I've never tried it myself, just a disclaimer. But there is a palatability enhancement in there, and it is a hydrolyzed pork and chicken flavor. So the benefit of that is that we can be giving this to dogs that may be sensitive to food allergies and things like that. But there is absolutely a palatability enhancement when it comes to Fortiflora. Mm-hmm. And we have tablets as well. You're not going to see the palatability enhancement with the tablet. You're still going to have all the benefits when we're talking GI and we're talking immune function with the tablets. But you're just not going to get that palatability enhancement because it's not sprinkled over the food.
And I've noticed with the tablets too, it's really nice because when we're feeding it, giving the Fortiflora outside, you're ripping those little packets open and it just kind of blows away on a windy day. So the tablets have been awesome for travel.
Yeah, they fairly new. We've got some really great stuff happening with Fortiflora. With the tablets, and now we're coming out with Fortiflora SA, which is the same Fortiflora we've been studying for years, but now it has an added prebiotic psyllium, which makes it a synbiotic.
So why would we choose that one over the regular?
So I think it really depends on the situation. If you've got more of, if you're trying to approach it with animals that we know have this dysbiosis, what we're trying to do is get back to a normal concentration of beneficial bacteria and potentially harmful bacteria. And what can happen with the Fortiflora SA is it has this symbiotic action with the psyllium. It can actually promote the production of not just Enterococcus faecium, because that's obviously in the probiotic, but what it's also doing is it's also promoting the growth of other beneficial bacteria as well. So Bifidobacterium and Lactobacilli. And it's basically just food for them. Okay. So if you've been using Fortiflora and it's been working great, then I say keep using it, but you're going to have other situations, and each patient's different, that they may require some of that psyllium in there.
Okay. So to save me the Google from dogs with dysbiosis, what does that mean?
So let's say we just have a normal dog, no problems whatsoever, poops good, a good fecal score. They are in this balance of these beneficial bacteria and the potentially harmful bacteria. We actually have a tremendous amount more of bacteria in our bodies than we do actually host cells. Mm-hmm. So there's this interplay going on. And imagine if, let's say, a Labrador knocks over the not to pick on Labradors, but I'm going with garbage gut here. Let's say the Labrador knocks down the trash and eats the trash. He's going to have what we call this dysbiosis, and it's going to shift to this potentially harmful bacteria. Okay. And he ends up with diarrhea, and the diarrhea is secondary to this dysbiosis. And in those situations, what we're trying to do is get back to a more beneficial microbiome where we go back to that interplay between beneficial bacteria and potentially harmful bacteria. So that's what when I say dysbiosis, that's what I mean.
Okay, I got it. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
So in the scheme of not all probiotics are created equal, what is it about Fortiflora that makes it better than other products on the market?
anytime I pick any medication for any of my patients, I ask myself three things. Is it safe and is it efficacious? That's one thing. What are the side effects and how much does it cost? In the scheme of probiotics, I want to make sure that they're safe and that there's no side effects. And majority of the time, probiotics have no side effects. So it comes down to efficacy. And how do we figure out if a certain probiotic is efficacious? And you need strong studies. And so if we're looking at a certain strain, you have to do these studies with that strain in mind. And so when we're talking about Fortiflora, we are talking Enterococcus faecium SF68, and that is the only strain that we're talking about. I use the example of Enterococcus faecium is like saying Homo sapiens, and then SF68 is like saying Taylor Francis, and there's only one Taylor Francis, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have these studies done with this specific strain of probiotics, because you're going to have other companies that are going to come out with a probiotic. There's one on the market right now that is a single strain Enterococcus faecium, but it's not SF68. Okay. But you need to go back to those studies. You need to have strong studies with good results to actually figure out if it's going to be beneficial. When we talk about, comparing Fortiflora to yogurt, we have all these studies showing all these benefits of Fortiflora versus these, genus, species, and strains in yogurt. They just haven't been studied.
Mm-hmm. And is it with some probiotics, they don't actually get digested? Is there something special about Fortiflora that it like starts working when it actually gets to the gut?
Yeah. So if you take Fortiflora and you put the powder in your hand, you'll see some little white dots in there. And what those are is the Fortiflora is actually microencapsulated. And if you imagine, if we're, going from mouth to behind, you got to get to the large intestine. That's where the majority of these bacteria live, and that's where we see the benefit. The only problem is we got to make sure that these bacteria are, one, viable in the package prior to giving it, and two, make it past the stomach acid. So we got to make sure that Enterococcus faecium can make it past the stomach acid, and that's why it's microencapsulated. It has actually a twofold factor: one, to increase the shelf life of the live beneficial bacteria, and two, to protect it against stomach acidity.
Mm-hmm. And I've had a couple of people tell me that because we've always tell people to give it to the dogs, pour a packet over their food once a day. Mm-hmm. And some have told me that they're opening up the dog's mouth and just pouring the packet directly in the mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just go with the tablets in that instance. I think they're okay. Getting the benefits mm-hmm. of Fortiflora, but it's probably not. The dogs probably don't love it.
Right. Yeah.
So I would just go with the tablets in that.
And actually, and that was the concern that was shared, was my dog doesn't like Fortiflora. and I said, well, tell me how you're feeding it. Are you putting a topper on the food? And I'm just dumping it in the mouth. Ooh, yeah. Well, I wouldn't like salt directly in my mouth either.
Yeah. Well, I haven't tasted it. Food. I don't know if it tastes salty. There's not a lot of sodium in it, but
no, I just meant in comparison. Like, I like salt on my food, but I don't like it dumped in my mouth.
I do like that analogy, and that's where the tablets come into play. So that's why everybody's excited about the tablets, because it's
right.
Because some people are going to have dogs that. I have two dogs. One will eat every single time I put food down, and the other one, he may eat, he may not eat. And so if we're going to get the beneficial effects of Fortiflora for the one that eats every time, I have no problem going with the packets. But the one that doesn't eat all the time, that's where the tablets come in.
Mm-hmm. So tablets would be good in the scenario where if people are adding a topper to the food or putting a little bit of water in to help with hydration over the food, tablets would probably be the best option now. But if we don't have access to tablets, is it still okay to put the powder form with a topper or with some water over top of it? Or
if you use the example of like going from dry food to canned food, I have no problem putting it on wet food. Okay. The only problem I foresee with something like that is if for instance, we're adding it to like a water bowl, one, the animal's not going to drink that entire water bowl right then and there unless unless they're a sporting dog that's been running around. But I'm afraid that it might get stuck on the sides of the bowl as opposed to the powder, which comes in contact with the dry food. They get enough of the beneficial bacteria as opposed to the wet food as well. They should be getting enough of it.
Okay.
So I wouldn't recommend putting it in like a cup of water. But in that instance, I would just switch with the tablet.
Okay, cool. So let's hop over to Calming Care, one of the newer products on the market, which is amazing, and I've heard nothing but great feedback. So tell us a little bit about what Calming Care is.
So Calming Care came out about, I think, 2 years ago. It might have been a year and a half ago. I've lost track of time with what's going on in the world right now.
Right.
I think it's Friday today, but I'm not really sure. So Calming Care comes out, and it is labeled as a probiotic indicated for canine anxiety. And when I first heard that, I'm like, well, probiotics are indicated for GI disease, right? And the fact of it is, we go back to the definition of a probiotic, and that's live beneficial bacteria. So the bacterial strain in that is actually Bifidobacterium longum 999, which is a huge mouthful, or BL999. And what we saw with that is that when we supplemented these dogs with BL999, we saw reduction in barking, jumping, spinning, and pacing in a certain select group of 24-inch Labradors. We saw decreased salivary cortisol and decreased heart rate, increased heart rate variability, which is usually associated with the more positive emotion. I mean, imagine these watches that you have that tell you how stressed you are. And if it's usually, they have a heart rate monitor on them, and they're testing your heart rate variability. When it came out and we were talking, people would say, so it's a probiotic. And you say, yes. And they say, what's it for? Because you guys have Fortiflora. And you'd say anxiety. And they'd say, oh, so is it replacing Fortiflora? And it all goes back to live beneficial bacteria and what's the benefit. So when we came out with, we were trying to assess anxiety in dogs because it's a tremendous problem. We said, well, let's try Fortiflora because we know it helps with GI health, and we know it helps with immunologic activity. But let's try it for stress. And we didn't see a great benefit with Fortiflora in stress. So we went back to the research facility in Switzerland, and we said, okay, what do you have? And they had been doing some testing with mice, anxious mice, and Bifidobacterium longum. And what they saw is this beneficial effect. They saw a reduction in it. And so we came out with Fortiflora. We launched it at, I believe it was VMX last year or the year before. And what I'm hearing anecdotally is it's done amazing things. It's really changing the lives of some pet owners and patients as well. And the benefit of that is that, I mean, is it safe and is it efficacious? Yes, we've shown with studies, and I'm probably not supposed to say this, but anecdotal evidence that it works, and it works very well. What are the side effects? It doesn't really have side effects, and it's fairly cheap. And then we go back to these options for pharmaceuticals, and as these generation Z or the millennials come out, and I see this all the time, they don't want the perception of drugging their dog. Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely benefits to the pharmaceutical side of it, and some dogs absolutely require it. But owners are looking for a more natural option. And when we're talking playing field, there's really nothing on the market like Calming Care. You do have various supplements like hydrolyzed casein and tryptophan, which have questionable evidence when we're talking studies. But when it comes to Calming Care, it's really in its own playing field.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the most incredible story I've heard so far with feedback is a friend with Weimaraners that hunts. She has a dog, I don't know if he was around 2 years old, and would just circle and circle and circle in the crate, out on the chain, just continuous circling. And she had tried, is it like a Xanax? Is that the one that's a kind of a doggy downer?
I do have patients that do benefit from Xanax. Yeah. So that is an option. She
had tried a couple prescriptions, even like in a Benadryl sedative mode, and nothing really helped the dog. And she gave this a try and swears by it. The dog has gotten it every day, I think, for at least the past year. And that's incredible because it almost put them at the verge of having the dog euthanized because they didn't think that he was happy and settled in his mental state.
Oh, I love hearing these stories.
Right.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And like I said, it changed their life.
Right. It did. And it's so something about the calming care. So I have a dog, I tried it on. She just gets very excited at feeding time. Whenever it's time to eat dinner, she does this scream and it's horrendous. And so I tried the calming care with her for 6 weeks and it didn't touch a thing.
Yeah.
So there's habits that it does help and also ones that it doesn't help.
Well,
right?
I mean, I go back to the question of, do we feel like that's anxiety? I mean, she's about to get fed and she makes this excited noise. I'm not surprised that calming care didn't help that because that's a learned behavior by her and it's not an anxious behavior. It's, it's a difference between, getting really excited when they see food, which I expect them to do versus being debilitated in the corner when it's the 4th of July or there's thunderstorms. Right. So going to that, calming care in the study, 90% of the dogs improved in their anxious behaviors in 6 weeks. So there's going to be some dogs it doesn't necessarily work for, but the time frame is really the thing to focus on. So some of those dogs improved in as little as a week. Some of them, it took 6 weeks. I've heard somebody say, I gave it for 6 weeks. I didn't see anything. And I started seeing significant improvements in 8 weeks. So every dog's going to be different. Okay. But so for these instances of situational anxiety of, hey, Weather Channel says it's about to storm tonight and you can't just give calming care and expect it to have a beneficial effect giving one dose. You have to do it consistently every day. And I guess that's the difference between Fortiflora and calming care, because if we're talking GI disease and let's say you're bringing your dog into the vet and the dog always gets diarrhea at the vet. So I say give Fortiflora 5 days before he goes to the vet and then continue giving it there. You can see benefits from Fortiflora much, much quicker as opposed to calming care. Let's say the dog gets anxious when it goes to the vet and it goes to the vet, 3 days a month. You can't just give calming care 5 days before and expect it to work. The patient has to be on calming care consistently every day for us to see these benefits.
Mm-hmm. So what about dogs that don't like thunderstorms or getting ready for 4th of July? Should people start giving it 4 to 6 weeks beforehand?
Yeah, I think we can see some benefits. For instance, I have a friend, and her dog is the sweetest dog in the world. Very, very happy until it hears sounds like a car backing up, like a dump truck backing up, or thunderstorms or anything like that. In that situation, that dog is debilitated. It is in the bathroom. She has the doors closed, the lights off. She has a fan blowing so they can't hear. In those situations, I do think pharmaceuticals are warranted. But we can give pharmaceuticals and various supplements with calming care. There's no reason you can't do both. Mm-hmm. So I can't say that calming care will alleviate all those dogs' anxieties in this situational. And I think every patient's different, but there's no reason you can't give both.
Mm-hmm. So tell me your opinion on this. So a lot of sporting dogs are bred for high drive. With that, we commonly see separation anxiety, which the calming care, I think, would probably help with that. But what do you feel, would it affect their performance in the field? If I have a real a high drive, big running field trial dog, and I have it on calming care so that it lives happily, is that going to affect it in the field at all? Is that going to take an edge off that I wouldn't necessarily want?
Well, once again, we don't have studies with sporting dogs that would give me information that I could take and answer that question with 100% certainty.
Right.
In those situations, it comes back down to side effects, and we don't really see side effects with calming care, as opposed to in those dogs, if they're having separation anxiety, but we still need them to perform. I don't know if I would go with a pharmaceutical, because you're going to have, the most common one that I use for situational anxiety is trazodone, and it's safe. And it's not extremely expensive, but the side effects, these dogs are, when I would give it to my dog who had situational anxiety, when thunderstorms happened, he couldn't jump up on the bed, and he was an 80-pound Labradoodle. So that's going to affect his performance. But calming care, in my personal opinion, would not affect them. But like I said, we don't have studies with that.
Yeah. And I guess I'll be curious, when it's out on the market more for a little bit longer, what people kind of have feedback on it.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear from your listeners. If anybody's using calming care and they have seen a difference, I could turn it around and say, we're reducing the anxiety so the dogs can focus on their job now. So it might improve performance.
Right. And I have a friend that's very competitive in agility and obedience. And when the dog gets to the event, she gets a little bit more uppity and unsettled, and she has commented that the calming care has helped quite a bit with that.
Well, there you go. Anecdotal evidence that calming care helps with performance.
Right. And the dog's doing great. So I guess I should ask her that question. It's different from field drive, but hasn't affected the performance in passing or failing. So I'll have to dig more into that.
Yeah.
What about long-term use of that? Is there at any point, do we know if dogs are going to become immune to it, or are they going to need it, or does it eventually work off as a behavior because they're more settled in general?
So with the mechanism of action of calming care, it's still not fully understood at this time. And so the proposed mechanism of action comes from these mice studies where this is not a Purina study, but what was happening was they were administering it to mice. And if you think about the connection between our brain and our gut, imagine you're driving 70 miles an hour down the highway in a 55 mile an hour speed zone, and you see a police officer. You feel that in your gut, right? But there's this connection. So the vagus nerve is one of your cranial nerves that has innervation on your enteric nervous system and your GI tract. And so I feel that in my stomach if I see the cop. But it's not just a one-way directional road. It's bidirectional. And so what they did with these mice is when they were studying it, they actually transected or cut the vagus nerve below the diaphragm because it has innervation on the diaphragm. So they cut it and it stopped working. So that's the proposed mechanism of action when it comes to the dog. One other thing with our probiotics too, and this is one of the benefits of choosing a supplement based on good efficacious studies and from a reputable company, is that we know with these specific strains of Enterococcus faecium SF68 and Bifidobacterium longum 999, the strains specific to Fortiflora and calming care, we know that they have transient localization, meaning that when we give them, we can culture them out of the feces. And when we stop giving them, we stop culturing that out of the feces. So you don't really want to set up shop in the system because you want it to have this transient localization because it has that effect. And so to answer your question, I see no problem with it being long-term because with the transient effect, it's not going to kind of run rampant, especially at the doses that we're giving. And when you stop, it stops having an effect. So for instance, with Fortiflora, you return, and in the instance of calming care, this is anecdotally as well. When you stop administering calming care every day, we usually see the problem behaviors return in about 3 days.
In 3 days. Wow.
3 days. Yeah. So pretty quick.
Yeah. Wow. And then to get back to that calm mode, it's going to take around 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, going back off the study, I'm always going back to studies because that's where we get our information from. We've never had a study where we administered calming care, saw it worked, stopped administering it, and then re-administered it.
Okay.
So, from what I expect, these dogs might show a benefit earlier than 6 weeks.
Okay. What about using calming care with pregnant bitches?
I see no reason why we couldn't do that either.
All right. What about probiotics in the ProPlan formulas? So currently, there are added probiotics to the entire Savor line.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this happening? How is this strain different from the other ones?
So this strain is Bacillus coagulans 30. So BC 30 is what we'll call it. And this specific strain of a probiotic is meant for maintenance. And so if we approach this, we're not making any claims with this, any medical claims whatsoever. What we are approaching is with the idea that the use of this live probiotic, this BC30, would have this positive influence on the intestinal microflora, and the main word is supporting the pet's digestive and immune health. So with Fortiflora, these dogs are usually in this dysbiosis, but when we're going back to the probiotics that are in the ProPlan line, those are just there to support a healthy gut. Mm-hmm. They're not there to help with any problems like Fortiflora and calming care would.
Okay. So can calming care and Fortiflora be added to the Savor?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fine with me. Okay. When I get the question all the time, is it okay to give Fortiflora and calming care? And I say, absolutely. I wouldn't give them at the same time because usually the animals love the palatability enhancement. And for instance, when calming care came out, I was trying it on my dog, Mingo, and in the morning he would have no problem eating, and he's my difficult eater. But in the afternoon, when I went to feed him in the evening, he would just sit there and stare at me. And I finally figured out it's because he wanted me to put the powder on there. So I just say separate it out.
Okay. Is it not possible to overdo the probiotics?
We have instances where dogs like the palatability enhancement so much that they've broken into these boxes, and even cats have done it as well and eaten an entire box of Fortiflora. The only side effect we see from that is probably some GI upset, just from either an overstimulation of just so much bacteria. And I don't know, from like going back to studies, I don't have any studies of us administering, 30 times the amount, because that's how many packets come in a box and what that has. But if we follow these dogs out, they may have some GI upset, but it's only going to last a couple days. It's most likely from them ingesting the packaging. So with anything, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So I wouldn't be supplementing dogs with buckets and buckets of Fortiflora. But, if you accidentally administered 3 tablets in a day, I think that would be fine. I don't think it would convey any improved GI or immune health, but I think the dogs would be completely fine.
Okay. So if the dog has a really bad bout of diarrhea, it's okay to give them 2 tablets in a day or 2 packets in a day?
I don't think it's necessary. When it comes to probiotics, we tend to focus as human beings, as we're all human, we tend to focus on how many strains does it have and what's the colony forming units in there, how many CFUs, because that's just a measurement. If we take a look at ibuprofen, it's 200 milligrams of ibuprofen in a tablet, right? That's the concentration of ibuprofen in a tablet. Disclaimer, do not give dogs and cats ibuprofen. I'm just using that as an example. Right. When you come to probiotics, the amount in there is the colony forming units. And so if you look at one, like Fortiflora, which would be 1 times 10 to the 8, which should be in the millions, versus some probiotics in the market are in the billions, we would look at that and extrapolate and say, oh, well, this one has billions, it must be better. And it always comes down to the studies. We have shown time and time again the efficacy of Purina's Fortiflora in that specific colony forming unit dose. We don't need 10 times that amount. But you're going to have varying different colony forming units and varying different probiotic supplements. So when it comes to that, we know the efficacious dose of this Fortiflora is 1 × 10⁸. I don't think that administering twice that amount, you would see double the benefit.
Okay. And so I guess that would answer the question of why a Chihuahua and a Great Dane would get the same exact dose.
Yep.
Okay. Makes sense. What about how should we be storing them since it's a live culture? How can we keep them alive? Are they pretty resilient?
They're pretty resilient, especially with the microencapsulation too. So the shelf life of Fortiflora is 18 months. So I would just store it in a cool, dry location. I would follow the directions on the back of the bag, and I don't have those exact temperatures. But we've done studies with Fortiflora, and it's survived quite a long time in, I'm talking Fahrenheit of 150, and it survived quite a long time with that. Now, you're not going to encounter that in a daily occurrence, but I do get the question sometimes, what about these products being on trucks during the day? We're not going to get up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, in my opinion, in those. And so just store it in a cool, dry place in normal room temperatures, and it should absolutely stay for an 18-month shelf life. One other thing too would be the individual packaging of it. And when we come to the tablets, those are not individually packaged, but we get away with that because of the microencapsulation, as opposed to Calming Care. Calming Care is in individual packets. So
does that go the same for the Savor line as well, as storing dog food?
Yeah. So we would not add a probiotic into this pet food if we did not guarantee that it is viable in that food for the expiration date. There was a study done by J. Scott Weiss who's a veterinarian, and I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I think it was 18 different lines of pet food that said that they contained a live beneficial bacteria, and 0 out of those pet foods they actually were able to culture that exact genus and species and strain out of those foods. So, like I said, we have over 500 researchers, veterinarians, veterinary nutritionists on staff to figure out the best way to really grow this bacteria, the exact temperature to grow it, the exact pH to grow it, and making sure that it's viable. So if it's coming from Purina, I can guarantee you that if we make a claim, we're promising that.
Mm-hmm. What about, so recently I read something that there was a correlation with probiotics helping dogs with yeast infections in their ears. And as right now we're getting into the time where we're increasing dogs with water work. And so those ears are becoming a big issue. Do you know any research in that? Is there a correlation with if we're giving the dogs Fortiflora, if that's going to help with that?
I've heard the same thing about tear staining on like a Maltese before. There may be some anecdotal evidence with that, but we have no studies currently to support either ear infections or the tear staining as well. But if you go back to the studies that we do have, what we do show is improvement in the immune system, and those two occurrences, and especially ear infections, it stems from immunity. So I can't say that you will see a benefit from it, but like I said before, is it safe and is it efficacious? Fortiflora is safe. Is it efficacious for the ears? That I don't know, but what are the side effects? There's almost no side effects with it whatsoever. So there's no reason why you couldn't give it. Okay.
Is the Calming Care, is that hydrolyzed as well, that dogs with allergies can get that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it's a hydrolyzed pork and chicken liver flavoring.
Okay. I think that's all on my list of questions for you. Is there anything you can think of that would be pertinent that I might be missing?
Not that I can think of at the moment.
Okay.
But, if anything pops up, maybe we could jump on another podcast eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I have several topics here, Taylor, that I already have you pinged for, just FYI. So, and if I get some I've been getting private messages from other topics from people that they are looking to get answers to. So we might just do a little bit of a roundtable at the end to help people get those answers. I'll reach out to you. Yeah.
I love getting to present to veterinarians is great, especially about nutrition. But I always say, if I don't have to go off the PowerPoint and we can just have real discussions and real talk, that usually comes off better in the sense of learning, because we're approaching it with the frequently asked questions that you guys have, and hopefully we can answer those.
Awesome. Very cool. I'm very grateful that you are willing to do that.
Oh yeah, this is fun. Like I said, I love podcasts, and I've listened to yours, and so I'm not necessarily out running Mingo around because he's a Sheltie.
Sure.
But the more I can learn from this too as well.
Right. Cool. Thanks, Taylor. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was fun, Courtney.
It was. We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.
Okay, if you would like a chance to win a box of either the Fortiflora or Calming Care, submit a rating and review of my podcast on whichever platform you're listening from. Then send me a screenshot of it, and you can reach out to me through Facebook Messenger or Instagram, send it through the contact form on my website, or just shoot me an email. And on Friday, we will have a drawing and get out the box of your choice, and the shipping is on me because I'm grateful for the time that you have taken to listen to the episode. Hope you learned something from it and that you submitted a rating and review for me. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Bird Dog Babe podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and learned something from the content, please share it with your friends. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whichever platform you're listening from. Check out the show notes for links to references from this episode, as well as info on how to connect through Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're loving this podcast and want to support the production and content, please consider becoming one of my Patreon patrons. Being a patron connects us more on a personal level, where I'm able to help answer questions and give advice. My husband William and I have bred, owned, and trained AKC Master Hunters, Field Champions, NAVDA VCs, and AKC Show Champions. We're excited to not only share what we've learned, but also listen from previous and future episode guests for additional content. Go to patreon.com/thebirddogbabe and $5 per month and you're in. And as always, 2% goes to conservation. Until next week, bird dog babes, keep them versatile.